Splash. The stillness of the night was shattered only for a moment, then instantly silent once more. Hack! Smack! The tranquility was broke once more, this time from the cracking of hatchets into hollow wooden crates. This hacking echoed across the harbor, followed by another heavy splash. Then more hatcheting. Splash. These sounds came from Griffin's Wharf on the southeast side of Boston, where the two transports Dartmouth and Eleanor were docked, each holding 114 chests of detested East India Company tea on board. Moored nearby was the brig Beaver with another 112 chests. Altogether, the shipment was 92,616 pounds of dutied tea, about 21 million cups of tea, worth about 9,659 pounds then, and more than $1 million today. All along the wharf, a large but hushed crowd of spectators, including Bostonians and curious folk in from the countryside, watched as an extraordinary event unfolded. Parties of men dressed as Mohawk Indians worked to hoist the tea chests onto the decks of the three ships, while more worked to hatchet those chests open, pulling the loose-leaf tea from within and then tossing the tea and the chests overboard into the harbor. For several years, the East India Company had been suffering financial problems due in part to its own poor business practices, resulting in overdue loans to London banks and a massive surplus of unsold tea amounting to nearly 3 times its annual turnover. By December 1772, company officials had determined they could safely reduce their inventory to 1 year's worth of tea and sell off the remainder to inject some much-needed income, for some 90% of the company's profits came from tea. But selling this surplus in Britain would mean unfavorable tax liabilities as well as restrictions to sell only at wholesale. If the company instead sold the surplus in Europe, that would depress the tea market there and encourage smuggling of the cheaper tea back to England, thus undercutting the company's sales at home. So the company ultimately devised a plan to sell the surplus tea at a steep discount in America. The problem was that, by law, the company had never before been permitted to export to America. That was a service provided by various merchants serving as middlemen. Consequently, the proposed plan had to be laid before the British ministry, which had already deemed the company too powerful to let it founder, and was even now moving to take some degree of control over it. There was one important nuance to this scheme that seemed irrelevant at the time. Upon import to America, the tea would be subject to a tea duty of 3 pence per pound, the only remaining import tax left for the otherwise repealed Revenue Act of 1767, which the colonists had vehemently opposed. But ever since that partial repeal, American protestations had almost disappeared. In their place, colonists had returned to their avid consumption of tea, especially in Boston, where tea imports reached near record highs. The British ministry, therefore, had little reason to worry about this remaining tax on what was to be otherwise discounted tea. After all, it was expected that the colonists should be delighted to pay less for their tea. Of the various teas the East India Company offered, their primary product was consumer-grade Bohea black tea, grown in the Bohea Hills, now Wuyishan, of Fujian Province, China. The company determined to sell this best-selling Bohea leaf at a steep discount of 2 shillings per pound, which included the tax. Though such a low price would still not undercut illegally smuggled Dutch tea, the primary supply for New York City and Philadelphia, the East India Company could expect a significant profit from the Boston market, whose primary source was legally imported tea from England. The Tea Act of May 10, 1773, made the scheme official. Initially, the American response was mild. The first reaction came from New York, where smugglers and conspiring merchants worried that